So right now we're going to be watching the Babylonian Wars, which comes at the end of the third war and before the fourth.
Before we get into the meat of the Babylonian War, we must first disclose that the available primary sources on this conflict are scarce, as the eastern parts of the Hellenistic world suffer from a general lack of detailed sources. As such, we will be constructing as coherent a narrative as we can with what we have. Ironically, for such a poorly attested conflict, the Babylonian War was extremely important. Without it, the Seleucid Empire would not exist, and the Antigonids would have been a far more powerful dynasty with a far wider reach. The war's background essentially stems from the failure to include Seleucus in the negotiations that led to the Peace of the Dynasts. The ever-ambitious Antigonos was bound to want to reconquer the East, while Seleucus was already spreading propaganda that he was visited in a dream by Alexander himself to gain his blessing and become king. Much like Alexander before him, Seleucus put a heavy emphasis on cultivating good relations with native rulers in the east, establishing strong friendships with powerful local dignitaries in Babylon while he was satrap, and even showering lavish charity upon the commoners of that city. Moreover, he was also one of Alexander's generals to actually maintain his Susa marriage with—
Yeah, that's interesting. Seleucus even founded a city in her name in Syria called Apamena. It's also likely that their son and successor Antiochus I spent some time in Bactria and in some administrative role, as he was the ruler of the so-called upper satrapies there. He also used the Mesopotamian term Sarkisatim, or king of everything,
with his Sogdian wife Apama. To increase connections with Persian nobles, the couple even claimed that Apama was the daughter of the erstwhile Persian king of kings, Darius III. All of these efforts to build a powerful alliance network and legitimize themselves as the rightful rulers of Asia suggest that the Seleucids were preparing to enact a very strong political agenda. Incidentally, the policies enacted by Seleucus were inherited by his successors, and the Seleucid legacy of cooperation and syncretization with the non-Greek elites in their territories explains why their empire managed a relatively long, multi-century lifespan.
Yeah, Seleucid seems to have understood the importance of integrating and having great relationships with the Persians, and diplomatically did what I think Alexander was trying to do, before everything went down. So definitely the Seleucids are an interesting group, and Seleucus obviously knows what he's doing, so yeah, smart man.
Wary of Seleucus' growing power in Babylon, Antigonos sent Demetrios to the city to sort out the situation. Demetrios marched on Babylon in command of 19,000 troops, of which 15,000 were infantry and 4,000 were cavalry. Meanwhile, Seleucus had begun his campaigns to subdue the eastern satrapies of the now defunct Achaemenid Empire, a campaign of which we know very little. The aim of these campaigns was not just to conquer through force, but also cultivate relations with friendly satraps. In essence, Seleucus was expanding his power base through both carrot and stick tactics, taking territories that had only been loosely controlled by the former Achaemenid Empire and consolidating them under his rule. This was happening while the Peace of the Dynasts was being negotiated, negotiations that Seleucus may have been left out of due to envy and fear among his Diadochi peers that he was becoming too powerful. While Seleucus was absent from Babylon while Demetrios' army marched upon it, he had left a trusted commander, Patrocles, in command of the defense of the city. Patrocles' garrison likely numbered a few thousand men, though our sources do not clarify the exact manpower he had at his disposal. As Demetrios' armies marched into the satrapy of Babylon and drew closer to the city itself, Patrocles resorted to two strategies. One was guerrilla warfare, in which his men struck out from various hidden positions, attacking the army as they marched to Babylon proper. The other was similar to Seleucus' siege of Babylon, with Patrocles ordering the flooding of the irrigation canals of the region to delay Demetrios' advance. Ultimately, these measures only slowed Demetrios down, and eventually the invading army managed to reach the city of the Gate of the Gods. Ahead of Demetrios.
So the Old Babylonian name for Babylon, Bablim, means Gate of the Gods, is also evident in the famous Gate of Ishtar, built by King Nebuchadnezzar I, Babylonian intellectual, patriarchal, astronomer, priest, and chroniclers, were famous throughout the Middle East for millennia and were the originators of the zodiac in Western astrology. Oh, snap.
Demetrios' arrival, Patroclus had ordered the city's civilian population to flee and restricted his defense to the city's defensible citadel. Demetrios entered the city without any resistance and then organized his troops to besiege the city. The length of the siege is unknown, but we do know that Demetrios broke through and plundered one of the city's citadels. Nevertheless, the defenders persisted. After concluding the Peace of the Dynasts, Antigonos called on Demetrios to return to the west. Demetrios did as bid, leaving his second-in-command Archelaus with 6,000 troops to continue the siege. However, news from Persia brought hope to the defenders. Seleucus had solidified control over parts of Persia, with many local satraps now backing him. Thus, he stormed back west to his beloved capital. Entering the satrapy with many troops, Seleucus pushed Archelaus out of the city. After a campaign of reconquest, he managed to convince the enemy troops to defect to his side, forcing Archelaus to escape back to Syria. We know little of what happened during the escape. What we do know is that after hearing the reports from Demetrios and Archelaus, Antigonos decided to sort the matter out personally. Seleucus was becoming too entrenched and powerful, and thus he had to be stamped out before he solidified control over Persia and Babylon's endless wealth. Thus, like Alexander's patron god Dionysus, Antigonos resolved to journey east and bring the upstart Seleucus to heel. To ensure his success in the eastern campaign to come, Antigonus invested heavily in personnel, amassing up to 75,000 troops. He likely began his march in late 310 BCE and moved through the Near East into modern-day Iraq. Seleucus must have been aware of the coming onslaught, but decided to remain in Babylon. On the 19th of January 309 BCE, Antigonos appeared on the outskirts of the city. This time around, the defenders of the city did not hold themselves up in the citadel, but garrisoned the entirety of the city, leaving no part of it for the invaders to occupy. Seleucus himself had taken up a position in a command center in the citadel, where he could survey the entire city. The siege began, and after an initial struggle, the Antigonid forces were able to break through the defenses and enter the city, whereupon Antigonos allegedly pillaged its sacred temples. However, this may be an anachronism written by later authors seeking to character assassinate him. Slowly, the overwhelming numbers of Antigonids fought their way through the streets, pushing the Seleucids back into the citadel. Here our record becomes very patchy. We know that Antigonos tried to take the citadel multiple times, but ultimately failed in each attempt. Eventually he decided to retreat from the city, but continued to roam the countryside. Knowing that the threat was too big, Seleucus chose to abandon Babylon in an organized and tactical retreat. This was so that they could regroup and change tactics if needed. Antigonos seized upon this opportunity, and after a long and Pyrrhic struggle, which had seen his army sustain heavy losses, he seized control of all of Babylon, declaring himself master of the city. Subsequently, his subordinate Archelaus was installed as a satrap of Babylon in order to bring control to the unruly region. As records mention that there was much misery during this period, we can assume that Archelaus was not kind to the conquered natives, exploiting them heavily for plunder. At some point before March 2nd, the retreating Seleucid army reached the nearby city of Kuta. Antigonos pursued them and besieged the city, causing the Seleucids to abandon Kuta and continue their retreat. Pushing his mortal enemy further and further into the depths of Inner Asia, Antigonos seemed poised to solidify control over the heart of Mesopotamian knowledge and civilization. However, Seleucus soon reorganized his forces and began a campaign of guerrilla warfare against the Antigonid invaders. These asymmetrical attacks are not recorded, but they must have caused mass chaos among the enemy. An enraged Antigonos, possibly thinking the locals were on Seleucus' side, or that the Seleucids were getting supplies from the natives in the region, resorted to the most ancient and brutal of counterinsurgency tactics, terror. He proceeded to burn the countryside and cause mass.
Yeah, from what I've gotten from Antigonus from all these videos is that he doesn't seem to want to play nice with anyone, or at least, you know, use diplomatic ways of securing alliances. He just rather conquer and terrorize everyone under his heel, which I think is his undoing, because I feel like he should probably take, you know, something from the Seleucid playbook, and, you know, get people to like you, you know?
Mass destruction, which likely only emboldened locals against him. However, Antigonos's burning of the land ultimately forced Seleucus to come out of hiding and fight a conventional battle once more. Antigonos still had a numerical advantage, but Seleucus was determined not to go down without a fight. The two titans were now set to clash with one another in a classic Hellenistic field battle. Though in the end, it was cunning and treachery that would decide the war. The two armies ended up facing each other on August 10th, 309 BCE, or in the Babylonian calendars, the 25th of the month Abu. This battle survives in the historical record only through a short account by the 2nd century Greek historian Polyaenus. Nevertheless, it was possibly the most important battle of the Babylonian War. We don't know where the battle took place, but it likely occurred somewhere near Babylon. Moreover, the sizes of the Antigonid and Seleucid armies are unclear, but we can surmise that both had around the same number of troops that they had during the Third Siege of Babylon, with Antigonos leaving some in Babylon to make sure the city was under his control. The armies probably faced each other in similar Hellenistic formations and fought to a standstill. The battle lasted the whole day, but the turning point actually occurred when night fell, and the soldiers returned to their camps to rest. Antigonos ordered his men to disarm, dine, and then retire for the evening. Seleucus, in contrast, ordered his men to rest in full armor and battle formation.
Wow.
Then, before dawn, he ordered his men to take formation and march. As the dawn...
Dang. Again, Seleucus with another, like, kind of night attack. And he was prepared. It goes to show you the difference, right? Seleucus was prepared and ready for constant fighting. Antigonus was like, okay, I guess we'll just, you know, rest, be completely unawares, you know, until the morn. And wow.
One started to give way to sunrise. Seleucus' troops pounced and attacked the unprepared Antigonid encampment, whose soldiers had yet to arm and armor themselves. The ensuing massacre was likely massive. Despite scrambling to take up arms, the Seleucids were strong and fast. As a result, the battle ended in complete defeat and heavy casualties for Antigonos, though we have no clue about the number of dead on either side. This was most likely the last battle of the war. After this disaster, Antigonos was forced to withdraw his remaining troops from Babylonia and return to Syria. Seleucus was triumphant and returned to Babylon, reclaiming the city. On the heels of his military triumph and the reconquest of his capital city, Seleucus was finally able to establish his kingdom, with Babylon as the first of its many capitals. While not one of the main players in the initial stages of the war, Seleucus had succeeded in establishing his own empire and dynasty, the Seleucids. He was now free to turn to the Orient and conquer the remaining satrapies up to Bactria.
Wow. Seleucid was definitely an underdog, and he just showed up and completely dominated. Like, I love that. That's such a cool origin story for the Seleucid Empire.
Surviving ancient sources are patchy on what happened in the aftermath of the Babylonian War. For example, we do not know if a treaty was signed between Seleucus and Antigonos, or what its terms were if one was signed. However, it can be surmised that both belligerents now had other priorities that prevented them from reigniting their conflict against one another. For Antigonos, other issues were brewing in the Occident. From his power center amongst the sands of Egypt, Ptolemy was ensuring his naval dominance would not be questioned by the Antigonid navies again. the Hellenistic pharaoh moved to solidify control of Cyprus, whose city kingdoms had different sympathies and alliances, a pattern as old as the Ionian Revolt. Some of the pro-Ptolemy kings, like Nicocreon of Salamis in modern-day Famagusta, welcomed him. Others, like the king of Marion in the modern-day Acamas forests, supported Antigonos. Ptolemy razed Marion to the ground and abolished the city kingdoms of Cyprus, installing his local commander Nicocreon as the general in charge of the island. Ptolemy then moved on from Cyprus to the Cyclades, where he guaranteed the freedom of the city-states on those islands, before re-establishing the Nesiotic League, a confederacy of island polis now loyal to him. Ptolemy then landed in Corinth and declared the autonomy of the cities in the region. This presented a threat to Cassander, for Corinth's cities were his tributary vassals. Tensions between Cassander and Ptolemy soon began to rise in temperature.
I love watching Ptolemy work. He's making all kinds of moves, even in times of peace. You know, using the wealth and resources at his disposal, making diplomatic alliances, moving things around, establishing leagues. Like, Ptolemy's really smart. Like I said, there's a reason he's my favorite of the Diadochi successors. I love watching him at work because he knows how to play the game, you know what I mean?
However, when both heard of Antigonos' failures in the Orient, they decided to sue for peace. Ptolemy retired to Egypt, where he negotiated an alliance with Cassander and Lysimachos against Antigonos. It is here that two major tragedies occur in Alexander the Great's extended family. One was his younger sister Cleopatra, who had spent a decade under house arrest by Antigonos in Sardis in Lydia. She was there because if she was to find a husband after Antipater, said husband could lay claim to the throne of the empire. Cleopatra knew Ptolemy, for they had grown up together in Pella, and thus she tried to escape to find him and ally with him. Unfortunately for her, she was captured and murdered by Antigonid forces. Antigonos gave the tragic Macedonian princess a funeral, but he likely gave the order to murder her in the first place to prevent her from allying with Ptolemy. The other tragedy came...
Again, Alexander's family got so screwed over. Like crap, dude. It is tragic, actually, in a sense, watching Alexander's entire family get murdered by all these guys who were, you know, working with him, but at the end, their own interests prevailed. And, yeah, it is kind of tragic.
Unexpectedly from Polyperchon. For some time, Antigonos had kept Basine, Alexander's mistress, and their son Heracles as hostages. He started to spread rumors that it was, in fact, Heracles who was Alexander's heir, and sent him to Polyperchon so he could use them as political props and declare war against Cassander. However, Cassander was about to achieve a grim record, being the man responsible for the murder of most members of Alexander the Great's family. Basine and Heracles arrived in the Peloponnese, but Cassander bribed Polyperchon to join his side. Thus, Polyperchon, under orders from Cassander, murdered the last known heir of Alexander alongside his mother. With the final surviving wife and heir dead, Alexander's line went extinct, and the only remaining Argead, Thessaloniki, was married to Cassander. This is a tragic testament to the lives of women in the classical world, and to the politicking of elite men who used them and their children as political props.
Yeah, Cassander's brutal, man. He is a very brutal man. And, yeah, Alexander's entire family line basically wiped out. That is kind of tragic, though, you know.
All of Alexander's sisters, as well as his wives, did act as political actors, and were it not for the cards stacked against them, they could have been powerful rulers in their own right. As 308 BCE rolled around, Antigonos decided to take the initiative and ordered his son Demetrios to move forward in Greece and assume control of the Hellenic city-states. Moving from Asia Minor, he crossed into the Aegean Sea and then arrived in Athens. He expelled the Macedonian garrisons and the governor Demetrios of Phaleron, and restored the direct democracy the polis is known for. In gratitude, the Athenians began to rebuild their navy and bestowed upon Demetrios and Antigonos a title they were reluctant to even give to Alexander, Theae Satyres, or Saviour Gods. The stage was set for another war to begin. Thus, a new state of affairs arose in the Hellenistic world. The Seleucid Empire, now controlling Persia and Central Asia, was firmly establishing itself, while the Antigonid Empire was still privy to the resources of the Levant and Asia Minor, and the politicking of Ptolemy had made him the master of the seas.
Wow.
At the same time, Polyperchon and Cassander were now allies, and Lysimachos was keen to maintain control of Thrace. With ambitious men seeking to expand their power base in every corner of the Hellenistic world, another war, the Fourth War of the Diadochi, was soon bound to begin.
I'm gonna stop the video here. Tomorrow we're gonna watch the beginning. We're gonna just watch the Fourth War in its entirety. Let's see. Okay, wait, sorry. So what I really love so much about this is the constant power dynamic shifts that keep happening. I'm telling you guys, this would make a great TV series. I feel like Hollywood has really ignored the potential that actual history has. How dramatic and unhinged it is. Like, come on, like, this is just so awesome. And I'm really loving this series so far. Honestly, it's actually kind of one of my favorites. And I can't wait for more. So we're gonna watch tomorrow the Fourth War. Until then, bye everyone.